A while ago, I came across a discussion with some friends about a new anime which was airing at the time. They were kind of conflicted about the first episode, but wouldn't want to cast aside the entirety of the show based on the just 20 minutes worth of content they had so far, and thus brought up the 3-episode rule. However, one of my friends chimed in with the fact that he, contrary to the rest of us, abided by the 1-episode rule and had therefore already made his final verdict for the entirety of the rest of the show, and decided that the show was not gonna be worth watching. His comment split the room, where about half the people didn't agree but accepted his reasoning, and the other side was encouraging their beloved friend to apply perspective to the way he judged anime, since after all, they all share the same love for this media and want nothing more but for their friend to be able to thrive as an anime watcher and to take even greater part of this collective passion among the group. And by that, I of course mean they proved to this absolute degenerate of a creature what a disgrace is to the entire anime community and threw this abomination to the deepest pits of hell where not even traps deserve to be banished to. Now this made me think about two things. First, is he enjoying his stay in America? And second, what are the benefits as well as the flaws of both the 1 and the 3-episode rule? And that is what I want to dive into today and discuss with all of you guys. Please subscribe. No, but seriously, it feels a bit like I'm talking to a wall over here. Which isn't necessarily untrue, but, you know, it would make me very happy if you just hit the subscribe button and join the Nameless cult. Because at the end of the day, we are all nameless, and today we will be discussing the 1-episode rule versus the 3-episode rule. All aboard, let's begin. Now, just to be clear before we jump into it, if there happens to be some people who have actually got no idea what I'm talking about, in which case you probably have no idea what the whole intro was about, yeah, sorry. What people mean when they say the 1 and the 3-episode rule can simply be described as the amount of episodes of a show an individual considers that they should watch before they can decide whether or not a show is worth their time. Now granted, this is a rule people usually tend to apply to themselves willfully. It's sometimes become a topic of discussion such as the one I had with my friends, where people are trying to dictate how others should judge their shows in order to do it the right way or to do justice by the series in question. Now this reasoning of how much you should watch of a show goes way past both the 1 and the 3-episode rule, but I will touch on that at a later point of this video. I imagine that most of you have at least once came across an argument within a toxic fanbase, where a highly intellectual, rational individual of the internet tells you about how you shouldn't be allowed an opinion on a show they like simply because you didn't watch enough episodes for them to accept that you have a good enough understanding of the show to make a valid judgment that can be taken serious by the community. And the response is usually about equally nuanced. So we from the My Hero Academia community have decided that the 1-episode rule is pretty stinky because you have to watch at least 3 episodes to understand why Dekuraki is a better ship than Dekugo. Yeah, but without further ado, let's get into the rules themselves, starting off with a much simpler 3-episode rule. Simpler, I hear you say? How can the 3-episode rule be simpler? They watch more of the shows. They should by default get a more advanced understanding of the viewing experience.
Right? Wrong. Kinda.
While the obvious thought might be that the 3-episode rule does everything the 1-episode rule does, but better by giving it more time to create a coherent and collective opinion of the whole show, I would say that the biggest difference between the two rules mainly lies within the perspective of the watcher. Let's go through it. Now, the 3-episode rule allows the watcher to get a bit better picture of the whole show rather than just throwing it away after a slow or uninteresting first episode. Even though the first episode of a show might seem poorly paced, boring, messy, or just a bit all over the place, if you watch at least 3 episodes, you get to experience how the show then follows up on that first episode. This is where the perspective of the watcher comes in, to give a show a real shot and a second chance to get some speed of a potentially rocky start. This allows the world and its characters to simmer for a while and develop something like a conflict, a purpose, a story thread, and so on. It also allows the anime to introduce some more of the cast into the series and show how the protagonist interacts with these characters as well as how they interact with each other. The 3-episode rule simply carries the belief that there isn't enough content to judge in only one episode of a show to be fair to the show itself. As long as there are some aspects of the show which has potential or seem interesting, then it's okay to overlook the bad parts of the first episode and let the show prove itself on the interesting part. Because after all, in the case of something like an anime, it's only an hour worth of your time to feel like you're really making a proper judgment of a work which has taken months or even years to create. And that is a level of respect that I personally believe a 1-episode rule watcher does not apply when they judge a show.
A monster!
Moving on to the 1-episode rule, I believe it comes down to a bit more of critical thinking. If we take the arguments I mentioned for the 3-episode rule, it might seem obvious that the 1-episode rule is just unfair and ridiculous. But that is simply not the case, because you can take that entire reasoning and turn it on its head. 1 episode should be enough to know what you're getting yourself into. And how can one make such an unfair assessment? It's just the first episode, right? Maybe it just had a bad first episode. The first episode doesn't have enough depth to represent the whole show, right? But that's the main issue. It's the first episode. And what is the purpose of the first episode of like anything? It's to sell the show. The first episode of a show should be the hook. And that is where a lot of the budget usually goes. And if it doesn't, it probably should. Because the first episode should be flashy, cool, well-paced, intriguing, and epic. Since after all, it is the episode whose job it is to catch the attention of as many potential watchers as possible. If a show's first episode comes off as mediocre or has too many flaws or mistakes in it, then it could easily be dismissed or thought of as it's just that kind of show but less interesting.
もういずくだけで再生数1万は増やしてるわね。
さーい、まだだ勝負だいいなーあちくしょー諦めた方がいいね。
そんなやっぱりどこか悪いんですか？幼稚園の子たちはもうほぼ発言してるのに、私はちょっとしたものを引きつけるくらいで。僕も
And in the case of the discussion I had with my friends about Tower of God, I agree that the first episode, while I found it interesting, was very poorly paced and had several flaws to it. Flaws I could totally see as being off-putting to some people. Just ask the manhwa community about the adaptations of these new webtoon shows, am I right? If you're still not convinced that this is a fair judgment, look no further than to how manga is written. The very first chapter is often twice as long as a normal chapter to really pack that punch. And on top of that, almost every manga starts off episodically, meaning that the very first chapter both starts and ends a short story, and then throws a cliffhanger to entice the audience to watch the next episode. And it usually doesn't end there. The following chapters will usually follow that same structure to deliver more heavy-hitting semi-standalone chapters. The reason they do this is to capture an audience in order to create a strong following as early as possible before the story gets to branch out into more complex and slower story arcs. And while yes, I did say that the first few chapters follows the same structure, hence lining up with the 3-episode rule quite well, I want to emphasize the fact that the first episode is getting a lot more attention than the following ones. Just think to yourself, what is more likely to hook you into a show? A strong start with a banger first chapter which tells a conclusive story ending on a high note, or a show which starts with a slow burning story arc which is meant to develop over a long time, requiring the reader to follow for at least 10 chapters just to find it interesting. While the second option might actually end off with a story which is more interesting from the get-go compared to the episodic nature most manga is structured by, it will never get to that point if there aren't enough readers willing to follow it until it gets to that point. A gripping show which establishes its audience early on can easily transition into making these longer and more interesting slow-burning story arcs, but it's significantly harder to start from the other way and still succeed. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that while the 1-episode rule might seem unfair, manga and anime is actually structured in a way where the 1-episode rule should apply, and where the first episode of a show could actually most logically be judged by the 1-episode rule. Now, while I personally believe it's impossible for the first episode of a show to accurately represent the whole show, in many cases there is an entire genre of anime which I consider as being absolutely legitimate to judge by only one episode 9 out of 10 times, and that's the gag genre. If you think of shows like The Daily Life of Teenage Boys, Nichijou or Asobi Asobase, the gag genre in anime usually follows a very basic and simple episodic structure. Every episode consists of 2 to 4 smaller comedic skits, which are mostly completely independent from each other. These shows are not reliant on an overarching storyline, and while some shows repeat joke structures and make lighter references to older episodes, generally speaking, each episode can stand on its own, and in theory, a viewer could jump into any episode in the middle of a season and still be completely on board what's happening and get some good laughs out of it. Another entire genre you can judge in just one episode, in fact I would argue that you only need a tenth of an episode to judge, is the isekai genre. All you need to do is turn the episode on and turn it off again, because you realize it's another fucking isekai. See? One episode rule doing God's work. Now that I have gone through both rules, I would like to talk about why I personally believe that both rules are flawed, and I will do so in court. Now, starting off, the accused has made several severe claims on anime after watching only a few episodes at most. For the first case, he dismissed Made in Abyss after just watching 3 episodes. You can't say that Made in Abyss is bad if you've only seen 3 episodes. But it doesn't get good until the last 3 episodes of the season, so you need to watch the whole season. But guilty. You can't say that You alright there, buddy? Yes. You having a stroke or something? I'm fine. You can't say that Puella Magi Madoka Magica is bad if you haven't at least seen 3 episodes. But the first 2 episodes was the most boring stuff I've ever seen. Guilty. You can't say that Gintama is bad if you haven't even gotten to the parts where the actual manga begins. Who starts a whole show with filler? Well, you're making a good point, right? Still guilty though. Come on! You can't say that One Piece is bad if you haven't at least gotten past the Aeneas lobby arc. And how long is that? Only like 325 episodes? 325 episodes? Okay, fine. At least watch past the Alabasta arc though. And how much is that? 130? 130? Okay. Just watch past the Arlong Park arc then. And how long is that? Just 45 episodes. Oh, that doesn't seem too bad in comparison. Wait a minute, I see what you're doing here. You can't say that JoJo's is bad if you've only watched part 1. That part sucks. So should I have just skipped part 1 then?
You can't do that.
Oh, come on, Judge. He's clearly being unreasonable. You don't skip JoJo's. What's wrong with you?
Guilty.
You can't say that Boruto is good. But I actually watched the whole thing. You can't say that Boruto is good. Okay, at least we agree on something. You can't say that lolicon culture anime is pedo if you haven't even gotten to the part where they reveal their age. Okay, I'm out. While these examples might seem ridiculous and overtuned for the sake of comedic effect, I did pick these examples deliberately because they all do bring special scenarios which all directly contradicts both the 1 and the 3 episode rule. Puella Magica Madoka. You know what, I'm gonna make this into an acronym. PM doesn't really take off until the end of episode 3, meaning that you have to watch at least until episode 3 and then some. Made in Abyss is an atmospheric show which slowly builds its mysterious environment and the rules within the world, delivering a slower adventure which takes its time to set up the world, the characters, their motivations, and so on. This show very much doesn't put a legendary fish Pokemon on your hook every episode to reel in the audience, but rather gives you a Magikarp which uses Splash for 9 episodes and then turns into a Gyarados for the last 3. The first 2 episodes of Gintama is filler, so if you're not watching past that, or at least skipping the filler parts to start watching the canon episodes, can you really say that you are doing the show justice? One Piece is a monster of a series, and it's arguably one of the most elaborately written stories in modern fiction. It has a world where every detail in the story matters even 20 years down the line. The Grand Line? Every island has its own set of rules, climate, culture, politics, as well as its own connection to the characters, countries, kingdoms outside of it that you might have seen 5 years ago or won't see for another 5 years of time. This is a show which is so complex that I would say that it is impossible to judge the entire show based on only 1 or 3 episodes. The question here should rather be, am I willing to invest the time required to get through this story? Every part of JoJo stands on its own, only making lighter references to older parts, and should by that logic be given a 1 to 3 episode rule per part, which should be enough for you to realize that you don't skip JoJo's. Boruto is bad. Now you might say that I'm nitpicking these shows as outliers which just happens to not go very well with the 1 or the 3 episode rule. Of course you can't judge a long-running shonen anime like One Piece in the same way you would judge an atmospheric 13 episode long show like Made in Abyss. But the real reason I brought up these examples is because I don't believe they are outliers. Anime as a media is so nuanced that it is impossible to go into one show and judge it in the same way that you judge every other show. Now I used to be the kind of person who decided anime by type and decided from there whether or not a show was gonna be worth my time. And that might make a lot of sense to many of you. If you don't like watching a certain type of anime, like for example sports anime, then it makes no sense for you to actually start watching one in the first place. And if you're really put off by something like mech anime, then why would you watch a mech anime? Even if you do follow the 1 or the 3 episode rule. But the reason I said that I used to judge anime by type is because even this has proven to be a poor way of judging anime to me for the reasons I just mentioned. For example, I don't like mech anime as a concept, but Code Geass is one of the best shows I have ever watched. I am also not a sporty person, and I have avoided sports anime for majority of my life. But after being forced to watch Haikyuu, I am now burning with excitement for every new episode, to the point where I have started to purchase the manga volumes, and I'm even considering joining an actual local volleyball team. I have realized that the type does not matter as long as a show is written in a way which appeals to you. And in that sense, I would say that both the 1 and the 3 episode rule is better for judging a show than how I used to judge shows. I guess my evolution in judging anime can be explained somewhat like this.
どうしてくれるんだ金木明弁償できんのか400万リラのスーツだぞ甘たれだな敵だなてめえ何敵か敵か敵か敵か敵か
While I did state that I believe that both rules are flawed, I truly do think that the 1 and the 3 episode rules do bring value to whoever decides to live by them. I also think that this is a very hypocritical topic in general, but that in the case of these 2 rules, it's okay to be a hypocrite. In fact, I would go as far as to say that in order for these rules to work at all, you have to be a hypocrite. And that is why it's completely useless for anyone outside of the person who lives by the rules to get involved with their way of judging a show, because they most likely break those rules themselves from time to time. At the end of the day, having a standard that you should watch at least 1 or 3 episodes to judge a show is, all things considered, more of a chance than many people give a show at all, including my former self. And if we all accepted that these people are at least giving a show a chance, rather than bashing them for not giving them enough of a chance according to our own standards, then maybe more people would be encouraged to actually give a show a chance and share their experience with others in the community. And as part of that community, isn't that what we all want? More weebs to share our weebery with? Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Now I have to ask, have you ever experienced an awkward scenario when it comes to this topic? And how do you judge anime? Do you go by the 1 or the 3 episode rule? Do you judge by type? Or maybe some other way? Please let me know down there in the comments. Also, I'm considering starting a series where I personally judge random shows based on the 1 and the 3 episode rule. So if that is something you guys would be interested in, then please make some noise about that in the comments as well, about what kind of show or what show you would want me to watch. As for me, I've been Nameless, and if you liked the video, please leave a like, maybe subscribe for future content. And if you didn't like the video, feel free to leave a dislike, but remember that my real name is Mother's Basement. Nah, I remain nameless for now. Bye, Nara. See you, Nara.